Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com. We're with Tuesday Brews Day. You get a rant today. You can tell I'm already frustrated with the tone of my voice. Hopefully I don't sound like an old man here yelling at the clouds of how Magic used to be so good and how it's garbage now. But I just need to get this off my chest, do some ranting, because Magic has just been so frustrating lately. If you are a patron of me, you might be on my Discord channel and know from time to time that I get very heated talking about even formats like Commander that I no longer find enjoyable. And my main reason for Commander, I'll do an entire video dedicated towards Commander, is that it's just been pushed so hard with the Commander box sets that it feels like that you have to purchase those to be able to play the stupid format, and it's just become so tuned that you keep going back to the same old cards for particular decks and archetypes. And this Commander 2020 is no difference. You have a wheel deck that you have an untapped infinite mana deck. It's the same stuff that we've seen over and over again in these push commanders that feel like they're the best cards in their slots. And it's just more and more ways to continue to kind of gear how Commander's played. And again, that'll be a whole other rant another time. I know that if you have the right group, Commander can be enjoyable, but I've lost my love for Commander so much that I tore out a part of my decks. I pieced them out and sold them. I no longer have Commander decks. I no longer play the format. And so it's really hard for me to find a home in Magic the Gathering right now. Of course, it might be a lot of my frustration with that I've been playing all of Magic Arena. Arena has its own frustration because you take away the social aspect of Magic the Gathering and you're just playing no-name entities, across the internet, and there's no interaction back and forth that way. And it just gets frustrating going against the same decks over and over and over again on Arena. But it goes beyond just that. It's the other formats that I feel like Pioneer, the entire reason they created Pioneer was to keep away some of the more degenerate or combo-centric type cards that have plagued Modern, and have a format that's a higher power level than Standard and has more answers than what Standard gets plagued by a lot of times, these combo decks or these very linear decks. And it opens Pioneer up to a lot more different archetypes and ways to play the game. However, Theros changed that. Theros ruined Pioneer, in my opinion, with Dimir and Inverter of Truth having a sort of Splinter Twin type feel. Either you combo off with Dimir Inverter of Truth combo, or you just grind them out with value. And it's one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't formats that was very similar in Modern had the Splinter Twin in the mix. And then with the printing of the Underworld Fires, it just really pushed Lotus Breach over the top, that you have a Scape Shift like deck, that you have 4 turns to beat them or you lose. And so that really shifts the format into an all-out aggressive strategy that can go underneath decks like Lotus Breach and Dimir Inverter of the Truth, or it's forced you to play like a very, very streamlined control deck to rip out the cards and outvalue both of those particular decks. Neither of those type of decks I particularly find fun. If you actually look here at the metagame, we actually have now the Auras of Auras with Luris, because Luris is just so busted. Talk about a grindy mechanism. We'll talk about companions here in a second, because I just am not a fan of companions. I think the companions were a mistake. It's a War of the Spark level mistake, and we'll talk about why I didn't like War of the Spark as far as the design standpoint is concerned. And just the direction of Magic the Gathering has been just horrible in the past few years. The whole reason that they hired on this play design team was so they could test the limits of particular strategies or archetypes or ideas, but keep it in check with supposed professionals that would be able to find these glaring problems before they actually made it to print. Well, in my opinion, they have completely failed their job. I don't know how they can be justified to be kept on board right now and not fired, or at least have the play design team just completely washed away with, because it hasn't made things better. In fact, there's the argument that they made it worse because they start balancing cards, and some of the cards where they thought weren't very good, they end up pushing and making them even more Oko Broco than they should have been to begin with. There's the example right there was Oko. That was one that play design just wanted to be represented, and they didn't think the original versions were very good, so they pushed it even further, and it ended up causing a warp in every format. And we're kind of seeing the same thing with Luris. Luris is warping Pauper or Pioneer It's warping Modern. It even has showings in Legacy. A bunch of the other companions are warping those particular formats. And if you actually look at many of the Pioneer games or Pioneer decks, many of these will also have companions in their 75. So it just, for me, this rant is saying that, I had a video that was out today. I wanted to build a fun little Feather and Stormwild Caprador deck, and it was just game after game that was just awful with these all-in linear strategies that where if you're trying to build like a Feather, a very, very tit-for-tat, very interactive deck, you can't do it right now in basically any format in Magic the Gathering. That is my complaint right now. Is that's the way that I like to play Magic the Gathering the most, is having this back and forth, very, very interactive. You cast a spell, I cast a spell, we outmaneuver each other, and find synergies and combinations that way. Not completely all in linear control decks or all in linear or linear. I'll say it correctly for all the people that are going to hate my accent here. Controls where you're really pushed on the control end of things, pushed on the aggro sort of things, or all in combo, which we're plagued with in every stinking format right now in Magic the Gathering. So Standard, let's just talk about the issues of having with Standard. I think this Standard really, really, like every time I think we have a bad Standard, we went through Energy that really plagued, Jeskai Copycat, Siege Rhino. I think all of those are not nearly as bad. They're more enjoyable. Like, I would like to smash energy jacks into each other all day long over this garbage nonsense that we have going on in Standard right now. This very uninteractive mess that we're dealing with. And it almost makes me yearn for the years that I complained about of these, smashing Siege Rhinos and energy decks and Scarab Gods into each other. So what we have with Standard is almost every set, I would say they're problematic cards. Usually it'd be like, one or two cards that if they were to fix Standard, the amount of bannings, in my opinion, that they would have to do to fix Standard is in the range of probably 10 cards, no less. I mean, at least 5 or 6 cards. And I guess I can just go list down them, the ones that are breaking the format the most. I would start with, we can even go with Guilds of Ravnica. Let's start with the oldest Standard set. I actually don't really find any cards too problematic from Guilds of Ravnica. So Guilds of Ravnica gets a pass for me. Like cards that we thought were going to be powerful, like Assassin's Trophy, ended up being exactly not what Standard wanted by ramping the other player. And some of the cards that they thought were going to be powerhouses, like the Demon, this Surveil Mechanic Demon, or the Planeswalkers out of Guilds of Ravnica, whether it be I can't even think of the Gorgon at the moment. Those end up being kind of lackluster, and that is probably the set that is, you get the shocks from it, you get a few support cards in here, but it's probably the set that is actually the most underrepresented right now in Standard as far as archetypes being built around them. But the problems really start in Ravnica Allegiance. So I think that Ravnica Allegiance was a poorly designed set because it has some glaring problems with it. The two cards out of Ravnica Allegiance that I think that would be better off with not existing in the format would be A, Hydroid Crisis, and B, Growth Spiral. And people might actually look at me and say, well, those cards aren't that, back-breaking. I mean, there's even some arguments that Hydroid Crisis should exist. But the problem is with both those cards is when they went the War of the Spark, and they printed cards that wanted to be ramped into or really gave the ramp payoff, in the form of Nissa being able to ramp those cards. So Growth Spiral getting an early Nissa, and then Nissa getting an early Hydroid Crisis a lot of times should just be defining that is the way that you're going to play a mid-range type strategy. And so all of these cards have just been these kind of pushed the best cards they've ever printed in those particular capacity, which I think should be a big head scratcher. Like, I understand they want cards to be able to be played in Legacy and in Modern and in Pioneer, and if they really dumb down the power level, then packs won't sell because no one will want these new cards and everyone will say these are trash cards. But I think that is a necessary evil in today's day and age, which is such a high card pool, that you'd have to continue to push cards. It creates a kind of domino effect where each set has to become better and better and better if you want that same amount of cards that are represented in now a bigger, more powerful pool. And I think that's kind of the case we've become, is they create cards like Hydroid Crisis that is probably arguably the best ramp X spell that's ever been printed. And we have Growth Spiral. It's one of the better ramp spells as far as instant speed and draw a card with also putting a land into play untapped. So again, a lot of people might shake their heads about Growth Spiral and Hydrocrisis. I agree, they don't have to be on the high end of the spectrum of must be banned, but I would still say that the problems really started being ramped up with Ravnica Allegiance. Then we go to War of the Spark. So War of the Spark, I think, is one of the most problematic sets printed of all time. And it was the problem with pushing the static ability on Planeswalkers. We already mentioned Nissa, but I think when they were evaluating Planeswalkers, they looked at some of these cards, and they wanted them to be good independently of their static ability because they didn't know how good the static ability would end up being. So they created cards like Teferi that has a card very similar to a card that had to be banned in Standard, which was the Reflector Mage. Very, very similar to how Reflector Mage. But then Teferi just ended up hosing a bunch of cards with that static ability that had some unforeseen consequences. And especially when you paired up the Narset and Teferi, meaning that players can't draw extra cards per turn, and then they can't cast spells during your turn, or instant speed even. So it causes these locks to really occur, and pushing the control decks to be able to really hose any sort of mid-range strategy with these sort of locks. And without a healthy mid-range strategy, standards are always going to be terrible. And if you actually look at this list here, there is not a mid-range deck in the mix here. None of them is what I'd call a mid-range deck. We have ramp decks in the far as Bant Ramp and Sultai midrange, and Bant Ramp has a huge control aspect to it. Sultai midrange also has a huge control aspect to this ramp, so they're not trying to ramp into these big threats like traditional ramps are concerned. They're just trying to ramp into big mana for big control. Then we have these two decks that kind of subvert the curve, so they abuse the curve, with Jeskai Fire's doubling mana and Wilderness Reclamation doubling mana. And then we have some other decks as far as like Rakdos Sacrifice that can be very explosive, with also having just the ability to recur a lot of value, and Rakdos Lurrus is doing kind of the same thing here. And then we have Mono Red aggro, which is the extreme end of the aggro. Then we have the control ones that are very, very extreme end on the control end of the spectrum, where they have very, very few win conditions. So in the case of Jeskai Control, you're looking at usually it's still even Dream Trawler. They might be the one. I'm not sure exactly what this one is running. Maybe it's a Fires deck. Nope, it's just going to be winning off of Sharks Tycoon is the win condition, it looks like. And Narset ulting or Sharks. Nope, this is a Fires. What am I looking at? This is just another Fires, right? We got Cavalier Flame Return, or is this Fires Prevention right there. All right, so that's just Fires. Never mind. So these should just be put together. These Jeskai Fires and Jeskai Control Fires are very similar of how they attack the meta. If you add these together now, you're looking at 25% of the meta being a Jeskai deck. So the problem with like War of the Spark, we really started seeing issues with that. And from that set, I would think that 3 cards absolutely need to be banned out of War of the Spark. One being Teferi, the other being Narset, and the other most likely being Nissa. I don't think that any of them really add to the format. They've just really, really hampered the ability to brew decks and play a different style than what those cards have to offer. Then after that, we actually go to the Core 2020. And Core 2020 is not without its faults. Back after Origins, Wizards made a statement that they no longer wanted to print cards that just hosed what they called the color hosing cards. So they weren't going to print cards that say it's a black spell that just destroys white permanents and does it at a discount. They wanted to get rid of that kind of color pie thing, because they realized that it's too easy to splash cards, and then it just makes it so particular color combination or colors are not viable in particular formats. And so what happened with Core 2020, we ended up having to ban a card called Veil of Summer. There's arguments that Aether Gust needs to be banned. In my opinion, it should be banned, but we can't ban it with cards like Wilderness Reclamation and Fires of Invention and Embercleave existing in the format, because Aether Gust is really our only saving grace against those particular cards. And so it's caused a format that you have to actually click on one of these standard leagues. Well, some of the most played cards is a color hosing card with Aether Gust, which is not where you want standard to be. You don't want something that just is particularly used as a sideboard that are in so many main of these decks that people are running 4 ofs, 3 ofs in the main of many of these decks, because you have to answer these crazy threats in the form of Wilderness Reclamation, Fires of Invention, Embercleave. A lot of the cards out of these Rakdos Sacrifice decks are just good against, like, basically all of these decks that you typically do have. And Nissa, there's another card that answers is Nissa. And yeah, so Aether Gust is it just does too much for what the card does that it's hard to justify not running it. But the problem with Aether Gust, and one of the reasons I just got so pissy with this video, is I was trying to run a red-white deck and just keep getting blown out by mainboard Aether Gust because, oh, my cards happen to be red. And therefore Aether Gust is just a super insanely good removal spell at that point for anyone that's be running red or green. So that would be my problem with core, is those particular cards were just way too pushed. They weren't sideboard cards. They ended up being so powerful that you could justify putting them in the main. And almost all of them, a couple of them are more balanced, like Fry and the Devout Decree, I think are fine. And Noxious Grass to a point, but Noxious Grass is even pushing the power level of what a Hoser card should be. So Aether Gust, I think, from Core 2020 is really warping the format as well. Then we go back now, and we go on to a huge mistake of a set called Throne of Eldraine. And Throne of Eldraine already had to have many cards that were banned, like Oko and the Once Upon a Time, which I was one of the very first person calling that Once Upon a Time was absolutely busted of a card. It just helped variance too much and needed to go. But not only that, but after that, when we start scratching away the surface of Throne of Eldraine, we have incredibly powerful cards like Embercleave that also really warp the meta. And when we talk about warping, it's you have to, if you build a certain deck, if you build an aggro-based strategy, it's all roads lead to that card. That it pushes out any other alternatives. So like going wide right now is not really a thing. I mean, you can go wide-ish if you're using Embercleave just to reduce the cost of Embercleave, but you are really going all in on Embercleave, getting a big card with Double Strike. Many, many decks are still running that particular strategy. Happens not to be that great right now because Jeskai Fires is so insanely good with Karuga, but I mean, we'll talk about Karuga in a second. But then I guess going back to Throne of Eldraine is we had the Jeskai, or the Fires of Invention, which to me, Fires of Invention was just, how did they not think this card was going to be broken in Standard? How did they not think that doubling your mana on turn 5, giving you 5 mana available, would not be format breaking? And you can scratch away Cavalier of Flame and some of these other cards like Kenrith, which was included in the same set as Fires of Invention. And you scratch away those, and there'd be a million ways to break Fires of Invention. I think if you were like ban Cavalier and Kenrith, but keep Fires of Invention, we might just be going to like a Ruinous Ultimatum sort of rampish Growth Spiral Euro into Fires of Invention, getting these ultimatums that just, one-sided board wipes or one-sided just huge swings, and just outvalue your opponent at that point. So it's basically resolve Fires of Invention, and you're golden. But the other big problem too is you have these cards that then make it so, Teferi basically makes it so your spells can't be countered. They have to answer Teferi before your threat like Fires of Invention come down. And it's just created this really, really problematic format where all roads are leading to these particular double mana cards. So I guess going back to Ravnica Allegiance too, that was another card that I forgot to mention on that was Wilderness Reclamation. Same thought. How in the world did this card get past play design when they just read it that it untaps your lands during your opponent's turn, or not even in your opponent's turn? That's one of the biggest issues with Wilderness Reclamation. It should say they didn't want it to be broken because, we got a balanced commander all of a sudden. They don't want to ban a card out of commander, so we have to make it so the wording actually hurts Standard worse than it hurts commander, even though this is for a Standard set. Where Wilderness Reclamation probably should have said at the beginning of your opponent's untap step, untap your lands, and that would have stopped the stacking of Wilderness Reclamations on at least your end step, which is, I don't know, maybe it wouldn't make that big of an issue with instant spells, but yeah, I guess not. But it would force you at least to utilize that mana right then and there, and then not hold it up. With Wilderness Reclamation, yeah, probably not that big of a wording now that I'm thinking about it. But still, this was a card that I have not a clue how they didn't think that doubling the mana with so many instances available would have been format warping or format defining for Standard. And it's one of these things that also goes to more of a linear type strategy where it's just all going to be about resolving that Wilderness Reclamation and then winning. And I don't know. It's just a strategy, or these type of cards that try to go away from the curve and break the rules of Magic. That always make me angry. It's almost as much as I hate I win buttons, like Thassa's Oracle that I mentioned earlier, that just added another I win the game. I don't have to win the traditional Magic. I just have to set these parameters like Approach the Second Sun or Thassa's Oracle. But anyway, yeah, that's just. Wilderness Reclamation, Jeskai Fires. I hate that direction that Wizards has been taking. So let's go back again and look at the latest set. So we have, Throne of Eldraine. We think it can't get worse. And what does Wizards do? They make the same problem that they made with War of the Spark when trying to push their new mechanic. Static Planeswalkers should have been strictly worse than Planeswalkers without static abilities, but what they do, they try to mirror them. They try to make it so that the abilities on these walkers would be playable without their static abilities. Oh, haven't learned our lesson. Let's make companions. And actually, let's push companions to the point that, hey, you probably might want to put these in your 60. Let's just not make them only companions. Let's make them so they're competitive enough if you would put them in their 60s. And lo and behold, what does this end up doing? It just ends up being that you get to play a deck with 8 cards and your opponent gets to play a deck with 7 cards with very, very little restrictions to putting your companion as your companion. There's big enough card pools that you can easily satisfy the companions and make these really, really broken, busted decks. You can see that many of these now, Karuga, the Macro Sage, Yuran, Sky Nomad, Lurrus of the Dream Den, have just been put in to archetypes that existed before the Ikoria was released. And it's one of those things that I don't know how in the world this didn't get through design and say, hey, if we're going to make this companion, we're going to allow you to start with an extra card, we probably have to put bigger restrictions. So maybe companions should have read something like you have to mulligan your starting hand. So you get your opening hand with 7 cards, and then you have to, put one on the bottom. So you just basically start with a mulligan. You have your 7 card because your companion's there, and it's even a little more powerful than being in your hand because it can't be duressed or thought seized out. Or I guess duress wouldn't hit a companion, but it can't be thought seized out or anything like that. So it's protected until you do cast it your first time. And that would have been a lot more fair to build these particular companion-based strategies that now are ruining everything all the way back even to Vintage. People just throwing cards in. When a card like Lurrus is just being chucked in burn in Modern, you know you have a problem. So I don't know where we're gonna go from Magic. I don't even want to see the next sets for Standard. I don't want to see what slips through the cracks of what push nonsense Wizard of the Coast these play design people are going to miss, and design is going to try this time and see how broken they can make things rather than going back to that sort of tit for tat. You play a spell, I play a spell type Magic that I fell in love with. Last but not least, too. Another thing I got to complain about that is really, really grinding my gears is how come everything now has to have flash or haste? Literally everything in the format is flash or haste. You have this particular set with Ikoria had so many flash cards. Ravnica Allegiance had a lot of flash cards. And then we had Throne of Eldraine that just had a huge amount of haste in it. And haste that can't be blocked. And, it's like they don't want you to interact. I get it. Control was pushed for quite some time. And we needed threats that could actually push through answers. So the biggest issue now with like Flash and Haste is a lot of our answers are sorcery speed. They're just not, or they're conditional. And it's put us in this weird position in Standard where Haste and Flash are also really warping the way that you can play creatures. And cards like Teferi are demanding haste creatures. So it's not like you have a choice anyway. You have to be running these sorts of cards. That even cards that then get value. That used to be, Siege Rental. Would Siege Rental be playable right now in today's Standard? And I don't know if it would be. And that's where we're at today, is when these cards that were would like Aetherworks Marvel even be playable in this particular format, when like Jeskai Fires is arguably doing a better job of what Marvel was doing back then. This nonsense has to stop. I mean, I'm frustrated. I'm on tilt here. I just feel like there's just no place for me in Magic the Gathering. I can't enjoy Commander because of just how pushed the format's become and how these box sets have just really, really upped the power level of Commander and tuned them perfectly. That 100 cards have so much repetition now that they feel like a 60 card deck now. And now I haven't liked Modern in years because of how degenerate it does. Pioneer now is starting to go that route, and Standard has just not been fun for a long time. And I don't know how longer I can take this sort of nonsense of just rolling with the punches and like, oh, another crappy Standard, oh, another crappy Standard, oh, another crappy Standard. Just want one good Standard in a decade. That's just all I ask for. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this rant video of instead of the Tuesday Brews Day, had a good one for you this time that kind of fun little casual deck. And yeah, I'm sounding like a salty Timmy Johnny here, but I know how to play Magic the Gathering. I can hit Mythic if I want to. I've been to a Pro Tour. I day 2 the Pro Tour. The skill's there if I want it to be. I just wish there would be other ways to play Magic the Gathering. That's why I started Rogue Deck Builder, was to find these unique ways to actually attack the meta and not be pushed into the obvious choices that you have to build decks in today's day and age. Anyway, this has been Kevin with Rogue Deck Builder. Thanks for letting me whine to you.